Hello, this is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune. This will be one of our videos devoted to, let's say, history of philosophy, of reading some passages from the texts of the philosophers that get often mentioned on Kali Tribune. And one of those is, beyond doubt, Martin Heidegger. And Heidegger is being mentioned on Kali Tribune in a very negative light and a um, very critical tone. So we'll provide, as was the case with Hegel in previous video of this series, with some passages from Heidegger himself to add the meat to the bones of what we are talking or writing about on Kali Tribune when we focus on Heidegger in the context of some given subject. And these will be some passages from Sein und Zeit, Being in Time, the work that catapulted him into orbit of philosophical stardom, first in Germany, then in Europe, especially after the Second World War, and in America. And as many people think, this is the book where the reasons of his notoriety are also rooted in, that is his affinity and political choice of National Socialism as a political expression to which he remained, in fact, loyal until 1945. We won't go into that here. We'll reduce critical remarks to a minimum just to give you a feel of what's Heidegger about, the way he thinks. Now, Being in Time is his early work from 1927, not his first book, but his first great book, but it is not considered to be his, let's say, major or his decisive book, the book that in which he wrote and said the most important things. He himself didn't understand it as such. He understood it as a kind of Wegemark, the road sign that you have to follow in order to penetrate Heideggerian wisdom. And he was such kind of philosopher that his thinking was always in movement, that he constantly developed in this specific direction that became more and more obscure. Sein und Zeit is not an obscure book. Some people will call it that, but it is not. It is very difficult, very tightly composed. There are no passages you can skip when you read it. You have to be very focused, and this is this old German tradition of writing philosophical work. Other Heidegger works are not like this. After Sein und Zeit, they are quite different. Most of them, of his famous essays, some lectures, and afterwards the works that were posthumously at his own behest being published, and I think are still published even today. Sein und Zeit is an attempt to write, let's say, with some reservations, systematic philosophy. So we'll quote some passages and interpret some passages from the introduction. From the Heidegger's methodological introduction to the book, where he gives an outline of what Sein und Zeit is all about and what he intends to do with his philosophy. So we'll start with the way he divided the content of the book and point out one very interesting thing. So, Being in Time is not a complete book. It was meant to be written in 2 volumes that had specific sections. And out of this body of work, the only thing published is Esther Tile, that is the first part or first volume, whose aim was, as Heidegger say, I will quote, die Interpretation des Daseins auf die Zeitlichkeit und die Explikation der Zeit als des transzendentalen Horizontes, der Frage nach dem Sein. The interpretation of Dasein from temporality and the explication of time as the transcendental horizon of the question on being, or the question of being. This transcendental time as transcendental horizon is a very important. Now the other part that was never published, zweiter Teil would be Grundzüge eine phänomenologische Deskription der Geschichte der Ontologie am Leitfaden der Problematik der Temporalität. The outline of the phenomenological destruction of the history of ontology on the guideline of the problematics of temporality. And this was meant to be a kind of history of philosophy, critical history of philosophy. We'll say a few things about this also. Now, the first volume that was partially published was meant to have 3 sections, and those 3 sections, from these 3 sections, only 2 were published, and they constitute the book Sein und Zeit. The first is die vorbereitende fundamentale Analyse des Daseins, and the other is Dasein und Zeitlichkeit. The third should have been Zeit und Sein, not what Heidegger would call Kehre. The third book is called Sein und Zeit, and then he meant to finish it with interpretation of the being through time, Zeit und Sein, through some kind of methodological reversal, and this was never published. There is a Heidegger's lecture, Zeit und Sein, rather interesting lecture, and I used to quote a lot of it in, I think I quote, no, I didn't quote it, but I use it extensively in some of my works on Kali Tribune, where I mentioned Heidegger. And it is just a note to those who don't know me or don't follow Kali Tribune. I am not, to put it very mildly, I am not fond of Heidegger. But Heidegger was a great philosopher, nevertheless, and this makes him, in my opinion, a dangerous man, a dangerous thinker, and let's see for ourselves what I mean by this. Now, the Being and Time, or Sein und Zeit, is devoted to the question of being, and in very strict form. Heidegger says, this is the very first sentence, he starts with a quote from Plato's Sophists, Plato's Dialogue. We will translate that. Heidegger says, haben wir heute eine Antwort auf die Frage nach dem, was wir mit dem Wort Sein eigentlich meinen? Keineswegs. Und so gilt es denn, die Frage nach dem Sinn von Sein erneut zu stellen. Do we now have an answer on the question of what we mean by the word being or beingness in truth? No, we don't. In no way. And so it is proper to once again pose the question on meaning of being. Now, remember the question, when question, the fact that question is on the meaning Sinn of being. It's not something that is plain in itself, because you can question this metaphysical question on being can be rather a question about cause of being, or being as a cause, or being as a telos, purpose, being as a spirit, as God. Ultimately, Heidegger evades those traditional approaches to this question for his own reasons. He questions the meaning. Just to note that it is not, this is peculiar for Heidegger. This is something new in Heidegger, that Heidegger brings on the table, so to speak. So the question of being, why put it? And Heidegger wants to explain why is it so important. Moreover, why is it notwendigkeit? Why is it necessary? And how is it structured? He says, die genannte Frage ist heute in Vergessenheit gekommen, ob zwar unsere Zeit sich als Fortschritt anrechnet, die Metaphysik wieder zu beachten. The said question now fell into oblivion, and oblivion is a very important word in Heidegger. I will say something about this too later. Despite the fact that our time presents as a step forward its tendency to reaffirm the metaphysics. Now note, Heidegger is not a metaphysician. One of the main mistakes that especially young people make about Heidegger is that they think that he is some kind of metaphysician because he is posing a metaphysical question. The question of being is a metaphysical question, but he doesn't consider it as such. He wants to release it from the metaphysic. He wants to in fact destroy metaphysics, because he thinks that metaphysics is, along with theology, with anything, with this kind of questioning of the transcendent, something that is on the other side, something that has to be approached by intellect, but never can be approached never can be systematized and brought down to our level. He considers metaphysics always to be this systematization of the world, of petrifying it, and he is opposed to all metaphysics, and he is the poison for metaphysics, his philosophy. You have openly anti-metaphysical philosophies, as what is usually called British Anglo-Saxon analytic philosophy, but it people like Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein and such people, they just reject metaphysics outright and then build some kind of bogus metaphysics themselves. Heidegger doesn't do that. Heidegger goes into deep problems, deep metaphysical problems with a deep understanding, and then tries to muddle the waters, in my opinion. And that's why he's dangerous. And in any way, his philosophy has the quality of some strange kind of initiation, in fact, because you have to start to think like him to even to approach understanding of what he means. Now he speaks about various ways in which this term being is understood, and what is very important for him and for his research in being and time is to put forward the fact that being is something that is open to us in our everyday lives, so that it's something completely present in each moment. We are always in some kind of way this close to us, and now we'll see what it means by this. Angedeutet würde, wir bewegen uns immer schon in einem Seinsverständnis. Aus ihm heraus erwächst die ausdrückliche Frage nach dem Sinn von Sein und die Tendenz zu diesem Begriff. Wir wissen nicht, was Sein besagt. Aber schon wenn wir fragen, was ist Sein, halten wir uns in einem Verständnis des Ist, ohne dass wir begrifflich fixieren könnten. Was das Ist bedeutet. Oh, sorry, I misread this. Wir kennen nicht einmal den Horizont, aus dem her wir den Sinn fassen und fixieren sollten. Dieses durchschnittliche und vage Seinsverständnis ist ein Faktum. Now, it is important to remark, or it is worthy of remark. We are always moving in a kind of understanding of being, Seinsverständnis. From there comes to the fore the explicit question on being, on the meaning of being, and the tendency to go towards acquiring the concept of being. We don't know what is said by being. Now we'll stop here. This is very important in Heidegger's methodology. Was Sein besagt? You have very enormous difficulty to translate this in English and stay true to his way of thinking. Because in English you would translate this, wir wissen nicht, was Sein besagt. We don't know what is meant when the word being is said, and what is meant by being. This is not what he says. You can't say this properly in English. He says Sein besagt. In Croatian we have no problem. I have no problem understanding this form. He says šta se kaže pod bitkom, ili što govori riječ bitak. The point is that the very form alludes or indicates to a fact that being itself speaks. That thing itself in a way is expressed, not signified from the outside. And this is something you have in languages like German. You have it in Croatian, also in the form of language. And Heidegger built his philosophy on this later on when he leaves logic altogether. He would work with association. Try to compare, for instance, these as you can maybe notice in German, if you know any Germans are prone, languages very prone to making composite words that can then be disjointed and recomposite and so on. And he's always trying to make parallels between those words, their roots, and try to show, not prove or demonstrate, but show in the sound of words, very sound of words, that they are expressing, for instance, congeniality of things. And this may seem like a good idea, but believe me, it leads in the wrong direction, because minimum of intellectual structure that is meaningful structure that can be apprehended by intellect has to be there for philosophy to exist. And indeed, Heidegger didn't want that philosophy to exist. He thought that philosophy is at its end, and he didn't consider his philosophy. Later in life, he called it historical thinking, or thinking of Sein, and so on and so forth. So we don't know what the being is, what is meant by being, but we know being in a way. This is Heidegger's insight. But always when we ask, what is being, we are standing in the midst of the understanding of is, without conceptually determined what the is means. We don't know the horizon from which we could determine the meaning of this expression. This partial and vague understanding of being is a fact. Now this is important. Why he says it's a fact? In Heidegger, this factum and later facticity is very important because he wants to have a methodical investigation of the phenomena that are not something that you can investigate scientifically. One of that phenomena, for instance, is what he calls, go a little maybe out of my way in digression, but for instance, you have this what he calls Sein zum Tode, the being towards death. That is the fact, the facticity of human mortality, that is Dasein's mortality, and deliberate relation, meaningful relation it has towards its mortality. That's a facticity, that's factum. The other facticity is that we are thrown in the world, as he said, geworfen. This means that our birth, that coming into world, is not something that can be conceived, because once you have this being, he calls Dasein, specific aspect of human, specific, let's say, mode of humanity, is such that it is always being in the world. It cannot extract itself from the world. It cannot think something that is before the world, after the world, and so on and so forth. It is birth, not birth, but existing towards termination of death. This is facticity, and he's trying to provide what he calls hermeneutic of facticity. That is, bringing this facticity to light, bringing this primordial phenomena of existence into light. Now, this is important. That's something I want to point out. So, one part of this facticity is that we somehow understand what the being is, but when somebody asks us, of course, we don't have an idea what we mean. And this is what he wants to put under scrutiny. Okay. So, the being differs from individual beings. That's something that Heidegger is very adamant about, and this is also a fact, and this is something we may agree with him. I would agree. Bertrand Russell or Kant even wouldn't. I would, but for completely different reasons. And so he says, what is the exceptional being through which we could inquire towards the meaning of being in general? That is, he works on assumption that we have to start from the bottom, from this openness of being and primordial, vague understanding of being. Which is the being? What is the being that has this understanding, this meaningful, always meaningful relation to being in general? Let's say what he says. Ausarbeitung der Seinsfrage besagt demnach, Durchsicht machen eines Seienden, des Fragenden, in seinem Sein. Das Fragen dieser Frage ist als Seinsmodus eines Seienden selbst von dem Herrwesenhaft bestimmt, wonach in ihm gefragt ist, vom Sein. Diese Seiende, das wir selbst je sind und das unter anderem die Seinsmöglichkeit des Fragen hat, fassen wir terminologisch als Dasein. So, the working out of the question of being means to make clear, to clarify a being, to make transparent a being, a particular being, the being that asks the question in its being. What is questioned by this question is a mode of being of the one individual being itself, which is essentially determined by this, what is questioned in this question, the being itself. This individual being, which is always ourselves, we are always, this being, has, and among other modes, potencies of being, or potentialities to being, this question we terminologically determined as Dasein. Now, Dasein is always we, but is it we in the sense of human beings? And this is very problematic in Heidegger. He doesn't mean really a human being, because he doesn't want to use any traditional notion of what man is, because everything that was related by tradition he puts in question. He does this what is in phenomenology called epoche, putting everything in the brackets. And if you ask me, he kept everything in the brackets until the end of his life, and even posthumously his students. And he wants to have a primordial experience, although he even doesn't want, for fuck's sake, doesn't want to use the word experience. He tries to avoid even this word, of being, of revealing the meaning of being, of watching it reveal. And this is why he uses Dasein. Dasein is a very mundane word. In German it means the best English translation is existence, or Dasein, here being here. It is almost a banal word, and Heidegger made a great fuss of it. And this Dasein is more like an aspect or special view of man in his absolute individuality. This is extremely individualist term, which can be compared to the scholastic term individuum, which is a being without properties. And it is quite consequential that Heidegger chooses this, because he wants to have this primordial experience of being. Experience of being without influence of intellect, ethics, beauty, truth, just the pure existing. The pure fact that being is, because existence is a that is, not what is. He wants the pure that is. Metaphysics usually goes from what is. It goes from the cause, from the concept, from the meaning, from the intelligibility, and then descends towards the lower. What he does, he takes the lower, and I would say try to dig under it. But we are, as I said, I would try to refrain from much criticism, just to point out how Heidegger thinks. So the being and time has to analyze the individual being that is posing the question of being. Therefore, as we remember, the two parts of being and time that were actually written and published, one of them is the fundamental analytic, that's Dasein. That is fundamental analysis and what we call fundamental ontology of the Dasein. So you can think of it of some kind of philosophical anthropology, but Heidegger would probably have you shot for this unaufhörliche mistake. But it's kind of difficult to think about it in any other terms. Okay, now he talks about circling the wise, about this circle of argument of being and Dasein, what is first, and so on, and why they are in this circle, and so on. And he says, the question of being has an ontologische Vorrang, ontological primacy. That is, the reason is because it is the main question of ontology, because ontology is a philosophical discipline that is very akin to metaphysics and is usually was usually understood as a part of metaphysics, but it is more specific. It is devoted to the question of beings or being, ta in Greek, sein in German, or usia, substance, and so on, and the being itself, towards the being itself, because nowadays you can have ontology on university, you can have exams in ontology, but you can't have metaphysics, because metaphysics goes further. It goes into transcendence by its very nature. There is no untranscendent metaphysics. There is no metaphysics that doesn't deal with God, eternity, and so on. Only maybe inverted metaphysics, but that's something else. We won't talk about that. If anybody is interested in this dark, potentially existing science, you can consult Kali Tribune's works, especially about Order of the Nine Angles, trilogy, and there is much said about Heidegger there in the second part, so give it a peek. The other reason for the primacy of this question is the ontische, the ontic primacy. That means that there is an individual being that is related to being itself in such a way that it has this primacy, that any philosophical investigation has to start with it, and this is Dasein. Because in Heidegger's view, Dasein is the only being that has a meaningful relation to being. Trees haven't got this relation. The dog doesn't have this relation. The rock doesn't have this relation. The man doesn't have this relation, in my opinion, and because I don't think that Dasein is a man. In fact, it is Superman. But it has this meaningful relation, and this is how he defines it. Das Dasein ist ein Sein, das nicht nur unter anderem Seienden vorkommt. Es ist vielmehr dadurch ontisch ausgezeichnet, dass es in diesem Seienden, in seinem Sein, dieses Sein selbst geht. The Dasein is a singular being that not only that doesn't really only fit to be listed among other individual beings. Moreover, it is ontically singled out by the fact that this being, in its own being, is concerned about its being. Now, why is this sounds stupid? Because in German, this Seindes and Sein, different words, of course, obviously with the same root. But this Seindes is something in Greek you would call usia, or or onta, on, the being. Whereas the Sein you will call toenai or something like this. That you would use different words. In English, you really cannot translate this anyway else, but to say that, I think at least, that call these substances. And Heidegger hates this word so much, and he doesn't use it. So it's a peculiarity of language. But I'll explain what it means by this. The fundamental, factual, essential characteristic of Dasein is that it cares about its being. It is concerned about its being. And later on in Sein und Zeit, we won't go into that. This is only introduction. Heidegger will put forward this, what he calls Sorge, the care, as the main meaningful essence of Dasein. To care about being. So it's not intellect, as is traditional in philosophy, that man is a being that can think, that can intellectually grasp the higher, the deeper. No, 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 no. This is pure existence. There is no higher. There is nothing before and nothing after. Only in der Welt sein, as he would say, being in the world, like one word, connected. And this is very important to Heidegger. He wants to do analysis of existence without possibly having anything to do with essence. And this is, well, very problematic. So understanding of being, if you remember this vague understanding, unconceptual understanding of being, is, for instance, a mode of existence of Dasein. It is a part of its ontological structure. And as Heidegger would say, den Zusammenhang dieser Strukturen nennen wir die Existenzialität. The connectedness of these structures, various modes of being of Dasein, we call existentialität, existentiale. And the purpose of Being and Time, of the published part of Being and Time, is to analyze this existentialität, the facts of existence of Dasein. And some of them are angst, for instance, being towards death, its relation to death, its relation to nothingness, and so forth. We won't go into that. As I said, we are in the methodological part of the book, that is this forward, and we'll have to limit ourselves to that. So this is the primacy of Dasein. The book is devoted to question of being and the being of the questioner. And the only part that was written was this part about the question. Now, there is something very important. And he will say this in advance. Als der Sinn des Seins, des Seienden, das wir Dasein nennen, wird die Zeitlichkeit aufgewiesen. The meaning of being, of the individual being that we named Dasein, will prove to be temporality. This is only as a forward to where it's going. Now you remember when I said in the beginning, Zeit als transcendental Horizont des Seins, Frage nach dem Sinn von Sein. Transcendental horizon. Time is a transcendental horizon of posing the question of being. Now, transcendental in Heidegger, this word means that which is a finite border of thinking, that which makes possible everything, any kind of meaningful relation to being, and that which cannot be in a way transcended. So this means that the only possible approach to being and to Dasein and to being in general is through time, through temporality. It is a question of time. And there is something very interesting here. I would even agree that this would be a good choice of philosophical path, but there is a catch in Heidegger. There is nothing except time. There is, namely, no eternity. Eternity is the word that Heidegger almost always tries to avoid. And why is that? Well, I tell you. And I will tell you this by going into the part of Being and Time that was not written, but the rest of Heidegger's life's work was in fact explication of this never written part. Die Aufgabe einer Destruktion der Geschichte der Ontologie. The task of the destruction of the history of ontology. What Heidegger wants is to take this problem of temporality, that is, the fact of temporality of Dasein, that Dasein itself is in a way the source of time, that it is temporal in its essence, and this means that it is finite, mortal, and in what way the being can reveal itself through finitude, that is, how is it possible and how to demonstrate that being itself is temporal? The truth itself is temporal and finite, that it is not absolute, eternal, and always valid. This is what Heidegger wants. And with this, he flies in the face of not only history of Western philosophy, it flies in the face of revealed religion and even unrevealed religions of the East as Vedic Hinduism and such things. He flies in the face of fucking everything with this. And he is being cheered for this. And his logic here, but his philosophical acumen and intelligence were very profound in my opinion. And the second part was meant to be the history of philosophy going backwards from Kant on Descartes and then back to Aristotle and Aristotle's notion of time. Because in Aristotle physics, you have this, I think in book Delta, if I haven't read it for a long time, this Aristotle analysis of the phenomenon of time, which Heidegger considers to be the exposition of time. It is wrong as all other expositions of time because it relies on the notion of both of eternity, of existence of God, of existence of perfection of universe, and so on. But Heidegger thinks that Aristotle is the most clear among others. And Heidegger considers this non-taking finite temporality as the transcendental horizon as the reason for what he calls Seinsvergessenheit, that is oblivion of being. Heidegger thinks that being that reveals itself as eternal is in fact the result of Dasein understanding itself always from its world. He considers that Dasein in its everyday existence is trying to run from itself into dealing with world, so to speak, into all kinds of activities, whereas the original mode of being in which the being would be revealed to it would be to reflect back into itself, but not intellectually, but to face its mortality and finitude. And only in this angst, in the realization, existential realization of its nothingness, equally finite and equally nothing worthy being would reveal itself to him. And he considers the whole philosophy from Greeks onwards, except maybe some pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, to be on this path. And this is where we'll use his own words. Hierbei wird offenbar, dass die Antikauslegung des Seienden an der Welt, bisweilen Natur in weitesten Sinne orientiert ist, und dass sie in der Tat das Verständnis des Seins aus der Zeit gewinnt. Das äußere Dokument dafür, aber freilich nur das, ist die Bestimmung des Sinns von Sein als Parousia, Usia, was ontologisch temporal Anwesenheit bedeutet. Sein ist in seinem Sein als Anwesenheit gefasst. Das heißt, es ist mit Rücksicht auf einen bestimmten Zeitmodus die Gegenwart verstanden. Now, here becomes obvious or revealed that the explication of beings in antiquity in the form of the world or nature is in the larger sense oriented, and that in fact it is trying to it is ending up in the understanding of being as something out of time, the being itself, this big being, not individual beings. The document, the outside, like superficial, non-essential, never mind, document for this is documented by the determining the meaning of being as parousia. This means presence. That is ousia. This means, let's say, substance. I don't, unfortunately, in English you don't have proper words for this. The thing that is ontologically temporal means presence. The individual being in its being is understood as presence. This means it is oriented and always observed in the hindsight of a specific mode of time, that is the now, the Gegenwart. Now this is Heidegger's main crux of Heidegger's philosophy. He claims that you can think being without time. That is, there is no untemporal being, or better to say that to understand being as eternal means in fact to lie to oneself, to project being, to make being a projection. And this flies in as I said already, whole history of philosophy. Throw it out of the window. Throw the Evangelion, New Testament. Throw that out of the window too. Throw Quran. Throw Vedas. Everything. Because of this. And think about it. Now, he says we are understanding beings as parousia, as presence, as now, because we forget that they have before and they have the future. This is very deep insight. There is a lot of this is such a pity that he took this way he took, because this temporality of being, metaphysics of temporality, metaphysics of eternity is indeed something that we should focus on, but he throws it out of the window, trying to prove that the being itself, the big guy, is finite. But note, when you think, he's always talking about this being in general. But when you say being in general, you already use conceptual thinking. You are already transcending finitude in a way, and existence and experience, and he can never shake this off. So he tries to destroy the language. In his later philosophy, he says we don't have a grammar to express the truth. Well, we actually do, I would say, but he doesn't want to see the truth. He wants to have it in some other way. He wants the truth to be interplay of truth and illusion, literally. But this is another story. What I want to stress here is that when we reflect, and I ask you who are listening to me now, watching this, reflect. When you say individual beings, when you say being in general, and now put the temporality, put time in this mix, what can you imagine them both being temporal? I would say no. This is fact of mind, because our intellect cannot accept this. because metaphysical principles as eternity, soul, spirit, God, cause, and such are not projections, are not constructions, they are facts. This is metaphysical, not fundamental ontological facticity about which Heidegger speaks. But let us not rant. This is very important. Disanwesend. Heidegger wants to see being in its fullness, but not eternal, its finite fullness of its temporality. And to see this, to, as he would say, win this from the phenomena, he goes on to write Being and Time, and at least in this first book, it's a failed task. He is not able to finish it. And as I said earlier, that is at the beginning, this is why he cannot come to this. He cannot express, cannot understand, cannot do anything with this Zeitungssein. When he tries to understand this question of the meaning of being in itself, through time itself. And this is where we'll leave Heidegger. This is already 50 minutes plus, and it was very long. As you see, I just wanted to demonstrate how difficult this is, because this is only introduction to the book. This is page 36. We covered some 30 pages of Seinenzeit. The book is rather large. 436 and counting. Okay. Hope this was somewhat enlightening. Heidegger is difficult, partially because he wanted to be obscure, and in this I cannot help. But I think this was somewhat enlightening and thought-provoking. I hope you will profit from this. This is Branko Balic from Kali Tribune, signing out.